attending Neath Talbot's Planning Committee meeting now on this, the 8th of September 2020, 10 AM remotely by Teams. I am Suzanne Patterson, the chair, and my vice chair is Sean Percy. If for any reason my link is broken, my vice chair will take over. Please keep your microphones on mute unless called to speak, and you may ask to speak by either using the hand function or the chat function. Does anybody, is there anybody that doesn't know how to do either of those? No? Okay. If you have any difficulties, Democratic Services are here to help you in any way they can. So please conduct this meeting according to the procedural rules of remote guidance that have already been issued. I'll ask Democratic Services in a moment to call an alphabetical roll call, firstly of committee members, then of any officers present, and then of any speakers. But I also know today we have members of the committee who are not members of council who are not members of this committee who are also present. So they'll come under with the councillors, Tam, okay? Right then, if you then will, Tammy, please call the alphabetical list to make sure everybody's here. And at the same time, I would like you to ask if they have any matters of interest to declare.
Certainly, Chair. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I can't promise it'll be alphabetical, I'm afraid,
Oh,
Chair.
I'm sorry, I had that written down in my notes.
That's okay, Chair. Just, thank you. So, good morning. Councillor Patterson, you are present, but do you have any declarations of interest for this meeting?
I do not.
Thank you. Same questions to Councillor Percy, please.
Yeah, I'm present and no interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Good morning. I am present and that I have no interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Rydian Mason.
Morning. Yes, I am present. Item 4 is in my ward. I don't know if it's not going to be prejudicial, but no, item 4 fine, is in my ward.
That's fine.
That's fine. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ros Davis, please.
Cheers.
I think you're on mute, Councillor Davis. There. You're on mute. There you go.
Now.
There you go.
I said no, I have no interest to declare.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Steve Hunt.
I'm here and I have no interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Arwyn Wilcock, please.
Yes, good morning, Chair. I confirm that I'm present and I have no interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Williams.
Good morning, Chair. I confirm my attendance and I have no interest to declare.
That's great. Thank you. Councillor Suzanne Renkes, please.
I'm present and I have no interest to declare.
Thank you very much. Councillor Scott Bamsley, please.
Present with no interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Jones.
Yes, present, no interest to declare.
Thank you very much. I believe Councillor Mark Prothero, you've joined us now, have you?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I've been here from the start, actually.
Oh, apologies.
I just confirm I am present and I have no interest to declare. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we also confirm that Councillor Annette Wingrave, the LDP member, is present?
I'm here, Tammy. I have no voting capacity, so no interest to declare.
Thank you, Councillor. That's great. Local members, we have Councillor Charlotte Galsworthy.
Good morning, all. I'm here. No
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Simon Noyle, local member.
Hi, Tammy. Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. And also Councillor Del Morgan, local member.
Hello, Tammy. I am present. If you can hear me, the connection isn't very good, but if you can hear me, then that's fine.
Yes, we've got you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've then got planning officers. Steve Ball.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm present.
Morning. Russell Borthwick.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks.
Thank you. Nicola Lake.
I'm present.
Thank you, Nicola. Pollution Control Officer, Mutakia Mohammed.
I'm present. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Democratic Services Officers, myself, Tammy Davis, and Jane Woodman-Ralph.
Present.
Thanks, Jane. Highways Officer, Terry Davis.
I'm present.
Thank you. Legal Officers, Mike Shaw.
Yes, good morning.
Thank you, Mike. And Rebecca McGregor.
Good morning, all.
Good morning. IT Officer, Spencer Blewett.
Present.
Thanks, Spencer. We have registered to speak on item P2020/0195, Heola Glyn, David Richards.
Present.
Thank you. Representing Geraint John Planning Limited is Geraint John.
Good morning, all.
Good morning, Mr. John. You will have the right to reply following Mr. Richards. Luke Grattarola was invited from your organisation as well. I don't think he's present, though, is he?
No, he's not. No, just me.
Not. No worries, thank you. Observing the Heola Glyn item is Lee Garrett, a member of the public. And representing Wales Online, we have Hannah Neary.
Morning.
Good morning, Hannah. And that's it, Chair, from a long roll call.
Oh, thank you very much, Tammy. So we are quorate for this meeting.
We are, Chair.
Thank you very much. Welcome to all visitors to the Planning Committee. It's lovely to see you. I will just run through. Registered speakers will have their 5 minutes to speak. Tammy will be operating the clock, and at the end of the 5 minutes it will be terminated, so it's the interest of fairness. There will be the right to reply, as Tammy said. Local members, I don't restrict local members to 5 minutes, so I wouldn't want you to speak for half an hour, but you know, you're not limited to 5 minutes, and obviously members of the committee as usual. Okay. I do have an announcement. I had a request from Councillor Charlotte Goldsworthy because she has difficulties. She has got 2 meetings booked at the same time, and she wanted to come and represent her ward, and she's asked if we could do her item first. So item 4, I've agreed, will be the first one, because she has to go off to a Community Health Council meeting as well, and I wouldn't want her to miss that. So I've acceded to her request just to change the item roll or running of the meeting. Okay, you will all be aware that certain literature arrived yesterday. You will have all received literature. This will not take part as part of the proceedings today, but obviously you have had it, you have read it. You may ask questions, any questions on the debate part of it. So if anybody wants to ask questions, but we won't be actually questioning that document. So I hope that's clear for everybody. This is in the interests of fairness and equity. It arrived after the deadline of Friday at 2 o'clock. So officers have had very little time to look at it. Members may, I think one member received it last night when they came home after a day out. So it's not been, you know, fully accessible to everybody. So that's why it's not going to be included in the proceedings. But obviously, if there are any questions that any member wishes to ask, they can do that. Right, having said that, we'll move on to part 1. We've had the declarations of interest. Item 2, sorry, I'm having messages come through. So item 2, request for site visits. It's a bit difficult at the moment, as you can imagine, to organise a site visit. So what I've asked Steve Ball to do is to really take as many photographs as we can. If members feel they haven't got sufficient information, please let me know during the meeting. Okay, so we'll move for reports of the head of planning. So I'm not going to take number 3 first. I apologise to anybody who thought that they were going to come and have that one first, but I have explained the reasons for that. So we're going on to item 4. application P2020-0556, 3 Close Derry Sant Bryn. There is an amendment sheet. I'm sorry, that was on one further announcement that I should have made. So you've all got your papers, but they are to be taken in conjunction with the amendment sheet. Has anybody not received the amendment sheet?
Me?
No, I don't see any.
Myself, I haven't had an amendment sheet. I don't think.
Oh, right. That's Steve. That's a member, non-member of the committee, hasn't had the amendment sheet.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Goldsworthy, if you'd like to check on ModGov, it was published first thing this morning, so you'll have access to it via ModGov.
Okay.
Okay with that, Councillor Goldsworthy?
My ModGov has been playing up mine and it's not on here.
Right.
Chair.
Yeah.
If I may, there's no material difference for Clos Derry Sant because the only thing on the amendment sheet related to Clos Derry Sant is a clarification of a mistake that said for approval at the top of the report rather than refusal. So there's no changes.
No, thank you. Yeah, I should have thought of that. It's only that it was marked for approval and it shouldn't have been. It should have been marked for refusal. So you were well aware of that. That's why we're here, aren't we? So there we are. Okay, so we'll proceed with item 4 then, application 0556. Mr. Ball, if you could take the committee through the application, please.
Of course, thank you, Chair. I'll turn my camera off and I'll share my screen as usual. Chair, if you can confirm when you can view that so I know we can start.
I can see that, yeah, fine.
Excellent, thank you. Right. Good morning, everyone. I've moved the presentation for Clos Derry Sant to the beginning. You'll be pleased to see. So this is an application P2020-0556 for a detached double garage and associated access steps on a newly constructed dwelling on plot 22, which is known as number 3 Clos Derry Sant in Bryn. As the Chair has indicated, this is an application that's been brought to committee at the request of Councillor Charlotte Goldsworthy. She requested that the application be determined by a committee, effectively as a decision was made of the delegated panel, which in this case was the head of planning in my absence and 2 senior officers, which recommended to refuse the application in terms of the reason for refusal that are before you today. Councillor Goldsworthy disagreed. Requested it come to committee, and both myself and Councillor Pallison as chair committee on the call-in panel have agreed to accede to that request, and that's why the application is before you today. The site is shown on the site location plan in front of you. As it shows plot 22, there is actually a house there now, which I'll show you shortly in terms of the videos, but it's between 2 other relatively new properties just off Owen Jones Way, I say in a relatively new estate called Clos Derry Sant. There is the site plan that shows the red line is the actual site application boundary and the red line is the existing house. The actual plot itself is the blue and red lines combined, and so therefore when the original approval was given, which you'll note from the report included a parking area to the front, that was the whole of the plot there. Ultimately, this is seeking to make a change to the plot frontage to exclude, rather than the open parking area that was proposed before, to actually provide a detached double garage and the associated access steps shown on the drawing in front. This plan identifies, obviously on a layout basis, that the access comes off the off Clos Derry Sant into a parking area, and then you would access in the garage from the side where my cursor is, and it shows the retaining structure which is along the frontage, but then the creation of the garage itself sticking out proud into the frontage with the extension of a curtilage or a garden area over the top of said garage. This is the proposed elevation, so you can see the front elevation. That isn't the front elevation on the street scene, as you'll see on the bottom left-hand corner. It's actually the internal elevation fronting into the parking area. The actual elevation onto the street scene is shown in the bottom left-hand corner of the presentation, and you'll see the relationship of the adjoining properties at plot 21 and 23, which have a staggered finished floor level for each of the properties rising up as it goes up the street. And it shows that the property or the proposed garage would be in the frontage of that property, as you've seen from the earlier layout plan. This axonometric drawing is a good way of getting a flavour for what it would look like. Just as I say, that you'd be driving into a frontage area with the garage entry from the left and the garden area extending above the garage and including balustrading all around it, which would facilitate the use of this area for garden in connection with the new property. I've got two videos now. This is quite new for us. Last time I did committee, I did drone footage. I'm not going to do drone footage every time, but what we can do in certain occasions, and in this case, Councillor Patterson requested we do so. So we've taken a couple of videos of the street scene, which I'll just let run, and I'll just talk briefly over those if necessary. So this effectively is walking up the street from Owen Jones Way, and the property is the central one with the white gable, the modern property in the middle of the two properties. That is the application site in front of you. You can see the adjoining property's got banking in front of existing retaining wall, which would have been very similar to the retaining wall that was approved for the original parking area on the front of this property. The garage would actually be right in front of you as, if I go back, the garage would actually be right in front of you as you go, excuse me, in this property here. So I'm just pausing it. The garage would be right in front of you here. So you'd be entrant into the site, and then the garage would be in front in the centre. What you can see from this property as well, you've got the properties to the north, which are referred to in terms of overlooking as well. So you can see the relatively new property having been constructed on the to the north of the property. There's also another short video taken from the top of the cul-de-sac, which moves around, so you can see. Excuse me.
There. Yeah.
I don't know what's happened there. Sorry. Let me go back to the beginning. And again, if I pause it here, that the garage will be in this position here at the frontage, dug into it with the access steps coming up the side. And I just draw your attention, obviously, to the relationship with this neighbouring property as well, which has been referred to as one of the issues of what we consider to be harm in terms of the use of the upper space and the potential overlooking not only these properties here, but to the north. Yeah, here's the
Losing your voice at the moment, Mr. Ball.
Over there is
sorry, Mr. Ball, we lost your audio there for a small time. So whatever you said to go with the pictures there, we didn't hear.
Okay, Chair, I don't think I did too much. You would have seen what was necessary. I think ultimately what it was showing was the relationship with the neighbouring properties, both to either side. And as you're looking in this picture, if I just zoom to to this property here, which is to the north, which is referred to, and as the video went on, you can see there's a blank plot of land. That is also a plot that it will in due course be developed, no doubt, on this development site.
Okay.
So that is the extent of the presentation. I'll leave that picture up from the video. The report goes into the issues and impacts. Ultimately, there's a couple of drawings on there, the axonometric drawings that identify both what we originally approved as a parking area, which shows the retaining structures and central access steps going up with parking area, which was considered to be wholly acceptable. It also refers to the fact that we have had negotiations with the applicant. This isn't a case where we're certainly not an authority that just looks at applications and refuses them point blank without trying to negotiate improvements or to make development acceptable. In this case, things did change at the time of submission because it was originally proposed with a more traditional pitched roof on the front, but we certainly raised concerns about the physical impact of the structure. They chose to come forward with the current scheme, which provides the flat roof with the extended garden area on the front. But as you can see from the report, we are concerned about the impact on that on two fronts. Yeah. The first of that is the impact on residential amenity, which is both particularly in respect of the impact of looking from the frontage area above the garage, where there'd be no opportunity to restrict its use or for siting of tables and chairs or umbrellas or any residential paraphernalia that might be placed upon there, that would potentially then have overlooking from the front at the top of the garage, albeit very slightly at a slightly lower level than the adjoining property, would still look directly back into that property. But also from this thing would also be looking, as I talked about, to the property to the north, or the property and properties to the north as well. So we're concerned about the impact on amenity of properties. We also consider the introduction of this structure, both in itself at the front as a large double garage, but also because of the introduction of garden area with balustrading and potential residential paraphernalia, that would be unacceptable from a visual amenity perspective and in terms of character and appearance. So as you'll note from the bottom of page 57, the recommendation is to refuse on those two grounds, which I won't read out for now, but they summarise, or I have summarised in my presentation. So that's the end of that. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. For those who are new to our committee today, what I normally would do now is ask the local member who's not part of the committee but has wanted to speak, and in this case it is Councillor Goldsworthy, who has asked for the call-in, and we've acceded to it coming to committee. I would say that in no way do I sort of disagree with the officers. I just wanted Councillor Goldsworthy, because she was so vociferous in her point that it was a wrong decision, that it should come to committee and allow the committee then to listen to her and decide on whether she has a point or not. So, Councillor Goldsworthy, please, if you could just say what you've come to say about this application.
Yeah, good morning all.
Thank you and welcome, thank you.
Yeah, basically I want to make it very, very clear that the resident themselves did not contact me in regards to this application. Basically it was picked up on when obviously the officer phoned, give me a call about it going to delegated panel. I therefore then asked for the drawings to be sent, which he did, and obviously the report. I immediately got in the car and drove to Bryn, because there was it just didn't seem right to me. I had to have a visual of it to understand more around why obviously it was being refused. While there, I did stand on a step ladder, take some photos to have a view of, obviously, as if I was imagining being on the top of the garage as well. Obviously then what I would see, I totally disagree about obviously overlooking into people's gardens. As you could see as you were driving up with the video, on the right hand side it's obviously like a hill on the first one coming, and obviously it's just a driveway with shrubs, and that obviously on the third plot, the third house. While I visited, the entire street of residents came out as well. Discussion started going, and they were all in total support of the application. The owner himself was not there, but the residents were, who also had asked if they, if they were needed to write a letter supporting also as well for the application. I think that the beauty of people coming into Bryn is also the views as well. And again, it is a lovely area, it's a nice street. And again, what the video don't show is what you would be looking at also, which is just like mountainside greenery and no other building other than them plots. Now, it also don't show, it shows obviously where the plots would be, but it doesn't actually show from across the road. So you have a pavement, a road, a pavement, a verge, a drop. So again, you know, I don't think that, you know, to say whether it's overlooking, because I strongly disagree with about the overlooking of the neighbours either side, and so do they. I also disagree on the fact of, you know, about the parasols and things, because even if it was just a driveway up, then obviously it could be designed where tables and chairs could go on the top of it anyway by choice. So I personally, knowing the area like I do and visit it a lot, I personally strongly is in disagreement with officers on this case. I do take into account, obviously, you know, our policies, but it's also down to a personal choice of what people see as design and things like this. But again, that is the purpose of having a committee of members, is that sometimes our policies and advice is not always what we actually know to or believe in ourselves as members, as councillors who actually live in that area. You know, so this isn't, you know, I'm having a go at officers, whatever, but on this particular case, I'm in strong disagreement with them, and I would welcome, obviously, this to be taken on, my views, obviously, being taken into account, obviously, with other members. And also, in obviously the drawing, because one thing I did ask, because I went looking for the owner myself, and I did ask about the brickwork on the side of the garage and the wall, and basically it was stated that it would actually match and blend in with the house as well. But if obviously the officers were going to say about the visual amenity of this, what strikes you most is if you drive to the area, apart from the one at the bottom, which is more on Owens Jones Way, all of the other houses are red brick, and then you've got this big massive house in the middle of them all, grey. So if there was any visual amenities I would basically have recommended against, would be that house would have been in red brick, not grey. So again, it's down to personal choice again, but that was passed, and that's basically what all I've got to say.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsworthy. I will shortly be opening up the debate to members of the committee, but I will come back to you at the end if there is anything raised during that discussion that you wish to comment on. So I'll let you have the last word before we go to recommendations. So yeah. There we are. So if anybody wishes to ask a question or make a comment on this application, could you do so by raising your hand or in the chat function? Councillor Rydian Maisen, who is also, I believe, a fellow ward member. You're on mute, Councillor. There we are. Thank you.
Very temperamental, that is. Right.
All right, that's okay.
It's yeah. Am I right in thinking, Steve? Well, I have been up there. I do know, but numbers 21 and 23 also have garages, but is that to the side of the properties?
The most important thing, as you say, is that they're not at the frontage, no.
No. So might this just be that we don't like a garage in the front? That's why that. Do you think that's spoiling the immunity, or is it just because you might have 3G grass on top of it, which would extend the garden?
It's both things, Councillor Maisen. It's a combination of the fact that it's at the front and it's a large scale garage, and we consider the impact of that garage and location is not acceptable within this local context, but also by then changing or bringing the garden over that then also creates unacceptable overlooking impact on nearby property. So it is a twofold reason for refusal. What I said to the chair and vice chair yesterday was, you know, if the only issue in this was issues of overlooking, then we could have considered either asking them to remove it or conditions that effectively precluded the use of the top of that garage, i.e. getting rid of any of the grass or grass creep, whatever might put on there, moving balustrading back and precluding any degree of residential use on that garage. But we are here to determine what was put before us which is as a whole considered to be unacceptable. So therefore, that's why you had 2 reasons for refusal.
Happy with that answer, Councillor Misen?
No, not really, because I just disagree on the visual immunity, because I know from other plots in Carmarthen, building plots, you might remember Tabernacle Terrace, and you know the backs of those houses, which are 2-tier, going in from the main road and down to the living area, overlooking multiple properties and without even a road in front of them. Now this property has got a pavement, a road and a pavement, and then house or 2 houses possibly to the front, facing north there of Owen Jones Way. So I don't agree with the visual immunity at all. You know, I'm sorry.
So you also agree with Councillor Goldsworthy then? Yep.
Yes, I've visited the site
Okay.
myself.
Right.
I haven't got a problem with it.
Right.
As have the neighbours, no problem.
Right. With regards to neighbours, I understand that is a concern for local members. However, they may sell their properties at any time and not be the neighbours in the next couple of months. So we have to, and I may remind members that the policies that the planning officers work to are ones that we have agreed to. So we may not like all the decisions sometimes, because we may think, oh, actually in that position it's not right, and I completely understand that. That is why I've acceded to Councillor Goldsworthy's request. However, we would be remiss if we didn't take on board the professional advice of 5 senior planning officers in our council. So anybody else that wishes to say something on this application?
I have put a message in the chat, Chair.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Councillor Hunt, I didn't see it. Yes, you go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I thank the local members, both, I know Ridian's on the committee, but Charlotte as well. It's always important, and I accept, thank you, Chair, for allowing them as well, because I think you did the right thing. Passion and helping the communities and the residents is very important, and that's what Charlotte is here to do today. So I thank her for that. Planning, as Steve would know, I'm probably the longest serving member on this committee now, and it's a roller coaster ride, each application on its own merits, of course, and as this is in front of us today. But you've probably stole a bit my thunder when I was going to say we sometimes disagree. We'll fight our own corners in our communities, but we have got exceptional officers. I've never always seen eye to eye with Mr. Ball or Carey or anybody else, but we got to respect that the legislation, planning policy, Wales and other, they have to enforce. We may not like it. We may need to change it at Welsh Government side for the future. We're going through our LDP shortly, and you know, to tweak and to make that more manageable for Neath Talbot Council and for the people we represent. So it is important. I'm not a lover of our policies, and in this instance I would say that looking at the videos that Steve's provided, I certainly would like to see some sort of work relationship with the applicant and the planning department to tidy that area up. I would like to see something there, which Steve mentioned in the beginning that he has done. He's given them some ideas and views that he can get something there that would be acceptable to our planning department. But in this instance, Chair, I certainly, for the reasons Mr. Ball has outlined in the report, will be supporting the recommendation of refusal today. But I just wanted to say thank you to those members for passionately giving their view, which I do respect 100%. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I think this is an exercise of democracy in action. The councillor objected, and now we are here as committee members to debate it and give our views. So I have Councillor Wilcock who wishes to speak, and then I see Mr. Ball would like to come back as well. So Councillor Wilcock, please. Oh, and Ros. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit confused. I welcome the transparency as well that you as Chair have shown and officers indeed in bringing this matter to members to have a look at today. That's got to be a good thing. I'm a little bit confused though. I note that the planning history shows that this is a very, very new build. Planning that was approved on the 11th of June last year. What I find confusing here, Chair, what's confusing me is surely if the applicant wanted a garage included as part of this development, then she should have submitted that at the time, which is only last year. So in going ahead with the build now and then coming in again then later for another planning application for a garage, which clearly officers don't feel fit in and they have some concerns with. So I just hope that those comments, when you're ready, Chair, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to support the officers in this one. And when you're ready, I'm happy to move the recommendation of refusal.
That'd be lovely. Thank you, Councillor Wilcock. Mr. Ball, would you like to say something?
Or do you want to let Councillor Davies come in first, and I'll mop up a couple of points.
By all means, you do my job for me. That's fine. Councillor Ros Davis, please.
I agree with Councillor Wilcock. I was wondering why they hadn't put a garage in the original application. I'm just wondering, has the applicant been advised of a plan design that would be acceptable?
So therefore, Mr. Ball, you can come back in now.
Right, thank you, Chair. I mean, generally speaking, what I was going to say was, as I referred to in the presentation, this isn't something that we just look at an application and we refuse because we don't like things. We always seek to negotiate and provide best advice to applicants. You're right, both Councillor Wilcock and Davies, that a proposal for a garage wasn't put forward. Councillor Hunt, you referred to what would be acceptable. And if you look at page 55, which has got the CGI image, that shows what was put forward and what was approved and what was deemed acceptable, which provides ample parking for this new detached property in a manner which respects the locality without having any adverse impacts on the amenity and neighbouring properties. By coming forward and kind of trying to retrofit a garage at the front, it has created problems for them because we are not happy with the proposal being put forward. What I would say is planning is a subjective matter when it comes to matters of visual amenity, not necessarily issues of overlooking, which I'll come to, but visual amenity. Some of you, I would say in the room, some of you around the screen may look at it and wonder and think, well, I don't think this necessarily causes so much harm, which Councillor Galsworthy and Councillor Misen have indicated is their view, and we respect that view. But what I would say is this is a view that's been put forward by the case officer, Russell, who's here today, having viewed and looked at it in detail and negotiated with the applicants. It's a view shared by Nicola Lake, the team leader who signed off the application for refusal, by myself, who agreed with that before I went on holiday, and by the head of planning and of public protection, who signed it off in my absence. So there's 4 or 5 officers who have all looked at it with all different varying ranges of experience, and all of who have agreed that this is not something we should be approving. Now, that doesn't mean if you agree to refuse it that it wouldn't go to an appeal, and an inspector with his or her own opinion might disagree with us. But you have the professional opinion of 4 or 5 of your officers, all of whom are saying to you this is not acceptable. And in my submission, the best thing is I would ask you to agree with our recommendation, noting that there is always an independent right of appeal against a refusal. The difference in overturning an officer recommendation is you are granting plan permission for this, and ultimately if it goes there and it isn't acceptable, then it's done because you have granted that permission contrary to your officer recommendation. You're perfectly entitled to do that on an individual basis, but I would recommend to you that the assessment you've been given is such that, I would ask you to support that recommendation. In terms of the overlooking issue, I do have another video if you wanted me to, which shows the views up from the main road. I also have, if you'd like to see it, a copy of the approval of the plot directly in that blank space that I showed you on the video. So, Chair, at your discretion, would you like me to show one or both of those for members' consideration? You're mute, Chair, sorry.
Have them, yes, it's only going to take another minute or two, and it might help members to finally come to their decision.
Okay, right, I will just get that shortly. So in terms of, excuse me. So I'm just sharing the plan now, which shows
yes
the plot effectively where the cursor is on the top of this picture. That is where the garage would be proposed to go.
Yes.
And this is the plot directly below, which shows that it's relatively close, as is the existing one on this corner plot, relatively close to the road. And also, if I, excuse me. And what you can see on this that shows what the property is, so it shows it does have windows both at ground floor and at first floor. So there would be a degree of a direct overlooking from approximately 13 meters or so from the top of that boundary. So it does show that there is a degree of impact on that property as we've identified. And if I go also, excuse me, with my technology.
Thanks.
And I'll now show you the view from the main road, which is Councillor Galsworthy talked about the views. So this again is the view from the main road. So you can see this is the property in the centre. Is C with 23 and 21 to the side. This is the plot in front. You just gone past the vacant plot, and this shows the road on the frontage. And then Councillor Galsworthy was talking about the views, the beautiful views over, which is indisputable that there are fantastic views from these plots overlooking the countryside. You know, Bryn is a lovely place, but that gives you a bit more context, I hope, over and above what I showed before. So, and unless you have any other questions, I'll stop sharing that. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, you can stop sharing that now. Thank you, Mr. Ball. Do I see any other indications at this point of people wanting to ask a question or make a comment? I'm going to go back to Councillor Galsworthy then, because I did say I would come back to her for her to have the last word. Councillor Galsworthy?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for all the comments now, but just to sort of put some answers as well in, is that it's not necessarily the 3G grass. They were looking at actual real grass as well, that obviously then fits in with the environment part of the build. In regards to the comment the chair made on about selling properties, again, that goes down to the choice of the buyer, whether they buy the house next door to a house that's already there as well on times as well. In regards to the policy, that's why a committee is there to obviously, sometimes, each case is different. So again, it's, having a view on a policy, and, it's like everything else, they're not always right and they're not always wrong. Do you know what I mean? It's again, one of those ones. But again, it's, this is an area that was derelict for years and years and years and was an eyesore. So again, that is another thing to take in. In regards to the comments from the councillors in regards to the garage at a later date, it is when the build obviously then started going up. At the back of the house is a big retaining wall, because it's like on the mountain, and it's very what they found then when it obviously started building was that they didn't have enough size out there for storage, like a shed and things like that. So this is then what came in at a later date, and if you look on the actual report, it actually says storage as well as garage. So it was, it's one of those things you adapt sometimes as well. And again, what I'd be interested, and I think it would also be interesting to the members, is also, what advice did the actual officers give the applicant? Because obviously one that was mentioned to me was like false grass at the side, walls instead of the glass balustrades and things like that. So I don't actually know, because I haven't asked the officers what they had basically, you know, sort of advised in actually compromising and supporting the applicant either. So I'd be interested in hearing that too.
Okay,
Mr. Ball.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsworthy. Mr. Ball, I understand it's been an ongoing dialogue with the applicant, yeah?
Yes, I mean, there has been advice offered that, I mean, ultimately, what I've said to Councillor Goldsworthy before is we've given advice about things, and there has been talk about kind of green walls with planting up and everything. And if I'm honest, I don't know whether that was something we had suggested or was put forward. But irrespective of that, you know, it would not mitigate the impact we're talking about, in my opinion, because if it did, then we could have put conditions to request or require the same. You know, we have sought to give best advice, but ultimately the only thing that you can do as members is determine the application that is before you now. If it is refused, then they have a right of appeal, or they have a right to submit an alternative scheme for a different form of development, which again we would consider as officers.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Thank you, Councillor Goldsworthy. I don't see any more members wishing to speak at the moment. I thank those that have. I'm going to go back to Councillor Wilcock, because he did say that he was prepared to move the recommendation, which is on page 57, with the reasons for refusal there, 1 and 2. So, Councillor Wilcock.
Yeah, I'm happy to confirm that I'm happy to move the recommendation to refuse, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do I have somebody that would second that?
I will second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. I'm going to ask now Democratic Services Officer Tammy Davis to go through the members of the committee, asking the question, have you been present for the whole item, and which way they intend to vote? Tammy?
Thank you, Chair. So first to yourself, Chair, have you been present for the whole item, and could you tell me how you would wish to vote, please?
I have been present for the whole item, and I am going with the recommendation to refuse.
Thank you, Chair. Same questions to Vice Chair Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Yeah, I've been present for the whole item, and I'll be voting for the recommendation to refuse.
Thank you, Councillor. Same to Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Yes, I have been here for the entire presentation, and I'll be voting with council. I'm voting for. Voting
for the
yes.
recommendation for
Yes.
refusal. Thank you, Councillor. That's great. Councillor Rydian Mason, please. Have you been present for the whole item, and how do you wish to vote?
I can confirm I've been present for the whole item, and I'll be voting against the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ros Davis, please. You're on mute, Councillor. There you go. There you go.
There we are.
I have been present for the whole item, and I will be voting for the recommendation to refuse.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Steve Hunt.
I can confirm I have been present for the whole item, and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Thank you, Councillor. On to Councillor Aaron Wilcock, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I confirm that I have been present for the whole agenda item, and I will be voting in favour of the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chris Williams, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have been present for the whole item, and I will be voting for refusal for the recommendation.
Can I confirm, Councillor, that you are voting for the recommendation?
Yes.
Which is refusal of the application.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Suzanne Menkes, please.
I've been present for the whole of the item, and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mark Rothwell.
Thank you, Tammy. I can confirm that I have been present for the whole meeting and I will be supporting the recommendation to refuse.
Thank you. Councillor Scott Bamsey, please.
Yes, I've been here for the whole item and I'm voting for the recommendation for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Bamsey. And finally, Councillor Chris Jones, please.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, I've been present the whole item and I will be voting for the recommendation for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. So, Chair, I can confirm that the application has been refused.
Thank you very much, Tammy. Thank you, Councillor Goldsworthy. I hope your CHC meeting goes well. Thanks for attending. Okay, bye-bye. Also, thanks to the whole committee for their input on that one. So we'll move then to what would have been the first item on the agenda, which is agenda item 3, which is application P2020/0195. The proposal for the variation of conditions. I'm not going to go all the way through that, but you have that on the top and this is marked for approval. So we do have a registered speaker, so I will call on them shortly once we've Steve has taken us through the application. But I do want to just again mention the literature. You may or may not have seen it, but regardless of that, you are able to ask questions on the item at any time. So, Mr. Ball, would you please take us through the application?
Of course, thank you, Chair. And just to reiterate the point you've just made in terms of the correspondence being received late, that's why the amendment sheet doesn't refer to that at all, because it's outside of the process and protocol. But you will note that one of the registered speakers is a Mr. Richards, who is the author of the submission that came round. So no doubt Mr. Richards will be able to raise whatever he wishes in his presentation to you. And then obviously at that point, you'll be able to draw any matters or any issues you wish to raise with me as a consequence.
Mr. Ball, just to...
Yes, Councillor.
I just wondered how you knew that Mr. Richards was the author, because I couldn't see anywhere on it that somebody had signed it.
I believe that came through from his email, is my understanding.
There we are then. Right, that's fine. Okay.
And we've also had correspondence from Mr. Richards throughout the course of this application, which has raised, if not all, certainly almost all of the matters raised within the literature in any event. So what I was going to say under the representation section is it's quite a lengthy representation summary has been provided, and that I would say summarises everything within the submissions, which are largely raising significant concerns about land contamination, and obviously we'll come to that in my response and any discussion we may have.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Ball. Carry on.
Right. Well, I'll do as normal. I'll turn my camera off and I'll share the presentation again.
Just before you start, I just want to remind members it is to be taken into account with the amendment sheet.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Right, so as the Chair has indicated, this is an application for residential development on land south of Hilloglen in Neath. You'll note from the report and the planning history in particular, this has had a lengthy history of consents dating back to the early 1990s, that were also adjusted in 2003 and latterly in 2010. So the application is actually what's called it's a Section 73A application to effectively retain what's on site and to continue with development on site with variation of conditions on the earlier consent P 2010-0562, which, as I said, varied itself P 2003-1330. The site itself is shown bounded in red, as you can see, as the application description or site context shown on page 5. It is a site of approximately 2.75 hectares. And as you'll see on the aerial photo in front, it is within both the settlement boundary for Neath, which is, as you can see, identified effectively the kind of the yellow shaded area. So the settlement boundary runs along Hilloglen, and it is also an allocated residential site for development of housing within the local development plan itself. And the extent of that allocation is shown in orange within the plan. that effectively replicating the site we had before us and which had consent dating back to 2003. As you see, that it is surrounded by residential properties, particularly on Hiola Glyn and Brynhyfryd. And there's the proposed layout that's before us. If I just go into a couple of things, as I said, this application is to regularise and to continue with development on the site, and it is particularly pertinent that in terms of the principle, as I'll come to shortly, not only is it in the settlement boundary, not only is it allocated for development, but it does have an extant planning permission that can be implemented on this site. The main issue is that there were a number of conditions on that consent, which the development was implemented, but they couldn't continue because they were in breach of those conditions, largely to do with issues to do with access for the Ghost Island, and also issues to do with some site investigation work to demonstrate that the access road would be able to be constructed in a safe manner with the appropriate compaction and etc. etc. So the fact that it is an extant consent is relevant, and I would note that extant consent is very largely the same as you have before us in terms of layouts, but the layout is changing both in terms of tweaks here and there to address certain relationships, tweaks in terms of removal of detached garages that were originally approved, or garaging that was originally approved on the earlier scheme, but also, as we'll come to later, the discussions we've had as part of this application have sought to change some of the levels within the site so that they are effectively better than they were before in terms to address concerns and issues of relationship with nearby properties. The description development just goes into the detail of the conditions that are relevant that need to be adjusted. That they are clearly relevant, but the most important thing for this is that we are assessing this as an application for development on the site, albeit effectively they already do have planning permission that they could implement for residential. So the principle of development, as the report states later, is acceptable. So the large thing we're considering now is what degree of impact does this scheme have that may be materially different to the earlier approval, and whether or not those changes are acceptable. So the report goes into the differences between the approved and proposed in terms of the number of properties, which the proposed is actually one less property than was before. 80 are proposed now compared to 81 that were approved back in 2003 and 2010. And there's a slight change in terms of the type of properties themselves, which are listed on the table on page 7 and 8, but nothing materially so in terms of the changes to the layout. The consultations and representation section, as I say, is quite lengthy because we have had, we've consulted on this and different plans on a number of different occasions, as shown on page 10, both in terms of property notification to individual residential properties and a number of site notices being displayed on and around the site in March, June and July of this year. And in response, we have had substantial representations from the local community. Approximately 80 representations have been received, not from 80 individual properties. I believe it's somewhere in the region of 40 properties, but we have had a lot of representations, and all of their concerns have been summarised on pages 10 through to 14.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, you'll also note that the summary of comments, there's an email from Jeremy Miles, MS, on behalf of a local resident, which is drawing the same kind of issues that have been raised in correspondence with us already, but raising our attention to them from Jeremy Miles, MS. You'll also note that both local councillors, in terms of Councillor Dale Morgan and Councillor Simon Noyle, have also both submitted representations, and we have had quite extensive ongoing discussions with the local ward members to advise them of the progress of the application, because they will be speaking today, but generally speaking, there's a support for residential development on this site because I believe there's an acceptance of the extant consent and the 30-odd year principle of development for residential properties on this site. But it is the need to ensure that this consent is appropriate and that any impact of it are addressed by either by design or by condition. And in summary, the report would emphasise that officers are satisfied that both in terms of the change to the design itself that have been negotiated and the conditions that have been imposed, would ensure there would be no unacceptable impacts arising from it. So going into the actual issues itself and impacts, I've talked about the principle of development being acceptable because it's allocated in the settlement and with an extant consent, so I won't go any further than that. The density of development is broadly in accordance with policy BE1, which is making sure that there's best use of land, so that's acceptable in terms of that policy as well. In terms of visual amenity, the site itself, and if I zoom down to a couple of the photos, sorry. The site itself, this is actually a Google image, sorry. This isn't one I took recently. This is an older one with the old Cuddy sign on. But it gives an idea about the stockpile that built up over the years in the middle of the site, which is referred to on page 20. Ultimately, for the previous consent, it was Cuddy Group who had the consent, and they did bring on a significant amount of material, which was at that time necessary to facilitate the development and create the landform necessary for that approval. That has been brought onto the site, and it did have a Natural Resources Wales license from them, a permit to bring the development of the land on in terms of inert material being brought on. And as a consequence, it was being moved around here and there, but largely you do have a stockpile which has effectively assimilated itself into the landscape slightly because it's had lots of, effectively its vegetation has grown on top of it. But that stockpile is still within the site and will need to be moved around. And indeed, as you'll note in the development, because of the changes to the levels that we have negotiated, actually quite a large amount of the material that was brought onto the site will actually now have to be brought off of the site, which may seem unusual, but actually is clearly to the benefit of this development, in our opinion, and the relationships with nearby properties. So in terms of visual amenity, we are satisfied having regard to the original approval and the changes we've made and that the developers proposed in terms of attached garages being removed, etc. We are happy that effectively this development will create an appropriate sense of place, and I'll move back to the site layout again. It will be an appropriate development in terms of the relationship with nearby properties, both particularly in terms of visual amenity. There are issues raised later in the report, which I'll skip to on visual amenity, about loss of trees and everything. So that's why I draw your attention to this particular plan in front of us now. We have been seeking to clarify, because we've had tree surveys submitted to us, and this plan does indicate that the majority of trees within and around the site are necessarily required to be removed to facilitate the development of the site because of the changes in levels, and because of particularly on the northern boundary, because of the vision displays that are necessary to achieve the required vision on the access to the A4109. But the landscaping plan that you have before you here shows we've negotiated, hopefully, if possible, retention of certain trees on the highway, although they may need to go because of these Section 278 highway works, I would advise, but also to double up the previous number of trees that were proposed for replacement and creation of native hedgerows along the frontage as well. So with those landscaping changes and with the design you have in front of you, from visual amenity perspective, officers are satisfied that there would be no unacceptable impacts from this development, particularly having regard to the fact that it is providing much needed new residential development, which is required both in Neath and generally in Neath for Talbot because of the need to provide housing within our administrative area. In terms of residential amenity, you'll probably note you have a number of reports that are brought before you over the months and years, and you'll note that page 21 onwards through to page 28 or 28 and 29, that's a very significant and substantial assessment of the impacts of this particular proposal on the amenity of neighbouring properties. Now, with any application, my officers and I will always assess those relationships on all properties and all relationships. But because there have been concerns expressed from neighbouring properties about the relationships, we have sought to have the levels that both within the report, that the pictures, but also the drawing that's in front of you on the screen, to make sure that we are wholly comfortable with those relationships and can ensure that any necessary conditions are imposed to protect the amenity of any neighbouring properties. So I won't go into every single one of those relationships, other than to say, if you look at the detail of each of them, they are very, very detailed in terms of the minutiae of potential impacts. And on that basis, we are wholly satisfied that while there will obviously be some impacts, because you can't create new residential development without having impacts, those impacts are acceptable. And in those circumstances where relationships of properties are tighter than others, that there are conditions, for example, covering potential need for boundary treatment or screening of patio areas, etc. So we are wholly satisfied on that basis with the conditions. There would be no unacceptable impact in terms of residential amenity. In terms of parking and access, as the scheme before he shows again, the main access is off the A4109, which has been started already, but this will create the final access form off the main road of Hiola Glyn. Obviously, with the consent having been granted, there's no issues of concern to the principle of residential development because it already has an extant plan permission. Officers from Highways Department are satisfied in terms of the safety of the access onto the main road, subject, as was proposed before, to a ghost island being proposed off the main road, which would be subject under condition to road safety audit. There would also be the emergency pedestrian cycle emergency access point in the bottom left-hand corner down towards Woodland Park, which you can see where my cursor is, that was proposed before and would still be proposed in an acceptable way, and therefore subject to the conditions that are put on relating to access, provision of the emergency access for emergency reasons only. There's no objection from highway or pedestrian safety. I've talked about trees already, and just to confirm, while it's obviously regrettable we're losing trees, generally speaking, but also from a biodiversity perspective, because of the need to change the levels within the site, and also moved on partially to issues of drainage, because of the need to culvert the site, which is being proposed largely because that is what was approved previously, and therefore they're seeking to continue to culvert that the drainage proposed on the site. While we would normally, in a different context, i.e. if we were looking at this afresh, we would normally seek to retain open water courses for biodiversity reasons. Biodiversity would acknowledge the extant consent, and on that basis the drainage scheme in terms of the culverting is acceptable, and the impacts in terms of biodiversity are similarly noted and considered to be ones that are would not be something we could refuse on, because they're not over and above that which was approved back in 2003 and 2010. And as I say, from drainage perspective as well, the scheme is acceptable in terms of the drainage, subject to the conditions that have been recommended as well. In terms of contaminated land, which is referred to on pages 32 and 33, I also draw your attention to the amendment sheet that had detailed submissions or requests from Councillor Steve Hunt, and that we officers have responded to for members today, which seeks to go into matters of land contamination concerns. These ultimately have been a fundamental part of local objections, and no doubt Mr. Richards, the local resident, will express the concerns that he and perhaps the local community have in that regard. What we do have our pollution control officer, Mutakir Mohammed, but he's Mo, please call him Mo, and he'll be here to answer any questions you have. And the response on the amendment sheet is from was directly via and through Mo as well. In a nutshell, the report will emphasise that we have had submission of reports to us, which and we've also got the historical reports that were submitted on previous applications. But in general speaking, there is no objection on land contamination grounds to the principle of developing this site for housing, which is considered to be wholly acceptable and something that can be more than adequately covered by conditions related to land contamination, which would require additional site investigation report to be submitted to us, because we're not currently satisfied that we have all the information necessary to understand the degree of contamination at the site. That would also require remediation to be provided that is suitable for residential properties, which is completely usual on developments within Neath Talbot, and it would also require verification. Again, all of these are standard matters that are dealt with on numerous sites throughout Neath Talbot, and Mo can clarify for any members of any concern in that respect about that he is satisfied that there would be no unacceptable issues. I emphasise that the local concerns, I think, largely emphasise or stating concerns about what has been brought onto this site and concerns from the public that the former applicant / developer has been bringing all manner of stuff onto this site. But we don't have any evidence to substantiate that. We will require through site investigation works to clarify the full extent of contamination in any respect. And conditions will more than satisfactorily address those issues in due course to make sure we are wholly satisfied. So while the concerns of stuff has come on, and there's been a suggestion in one of the submissions that an independent report was undertaken by residents, we haven't seen any independent report come through that indicates that this is a heavily contaminated site. And in fact, quite to the contrary, Mo, I'm sure will confirm that there's nothing out of the ordinary on this site that should be drawing any red flags waving about development of the site and potential impact on either on groundwater, which there are no objections from NRW, or in terms of human health, where there are no objections from your pollution control officer. So on that basis, we would submit that there's no reasonable grounds to object or raise concerns on land contamination. Finally, other matters are raised within the report, including section 106, because of the extant consent on this site, which didn't require a provision of any public open space, for example. We haven't felt it appropriate to negotiate that on this site, and similarly there wouldn't be any need for affordable housing any longer anyway, because this is not in an area that would require it in any event. So on page 39, as the amendment sheet states, regrettably there's a line missing from the original report, which is quite an important line, which actually says that the recommendation is to approve with conditions. The amendment sheet emphasises it's to approve with conditions as amended by the amendment sheet, because there are some conditions that have been changed to reflect the landscape and matters that we've talked about and refer to in the amendment sheet. But other than that, I draw my presentation to conclusion, and I leave it to you to invite the other people to make their representations.
That's lovely.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Ball. I just want to make a few welcomes. I want to welcome Kerry Morris, who was unable to be with us from the start because he was in another meeting, the head of planning. So welcome, Mr. Morris. Welcome also Mr. Richards, who's going to speak shortly. Welcome also Geraint John, who has the right of reply. Because Councillor Del Morgan, has indicated that the longer the meeting goes on, the less likely he is to have connection. After the
I'm still here, Chair.
Pardon?
I'm still here.
Yeah, but after the registered speakers, I'm going to call on you first, just in case we lose you. So if that's okay, after the registered speaker, that's fine. Okay, so we'll go now then to our first registered speaker, Mr. Richards. And I believe, Mr. Richards, you've been advised by Democratic Services that you have 5 minutes to address committee today.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
You will be told by Tammy Davis when you're down to a minute. So if you've got lots left to summarise, you can proceed from then on. So, Mr. Richards, in your own time, if you lose connection, just contact Democratic Services and we'll see what we can do about that. Mr. Richards.
Firstly, thank you for allowing me to speak. I've spent the last 3 days trying to get my representation down to under 5 minutes and found it impossible. My document is 4 pages long and represents the summary of the combined knowledge of around 30 council tax paying residents of Neath, most of whom have lived next to the tip for the majority of their lives. I call it the tip because that's what it is, and that's what it has always been. A landfill site, a rubbish tip. The planning department took 52 pages to support a developer who has history of breaking the law, and here I refer to the 70 protected trees that Enzo Homes cut down in Penllygare. The judge who imposed the fine on Enzo Homes stated that this was a deliberate and defiant act. Most of you will have received our report on how the Planning Department broke the 1990 Environmental Protection Act. In 2010, the Planning Committee rubber-stamped the Planning Department malpractice, and that has placed the lives of Neath residents at risk, and this includes my children. This is unacceptable. This is an unacceptable practice, and you are now aware. This 52-page document provides the combined knowledge of a few people who've walked over the site a couple of times and have tinkered with information on their desktops. The only geological survey that goes partway to identifying the complexities of the site was hidden in 2008, along with the contamination. This survey was withdrawn because it showed that the majority of the site was contaminated and that areas of the site were unsuitable for development. The document includes statements such as, it is assumed that no development of the area in the southwest of the site adjacent to the stream will take place. It is assumed would suggest that only an idiot would build houses at the location. Or perhaps we should rephrase that to include a developer that lacks integrity, as is proven at Penllygare, and is happy to build houses and move on to other developments, leaving other people to deal with the subsidence and flooding problems caused by the development. This has happened previously in the same location. The planning committee should take time out to visit numbers 2 to 8 Bryn Hyfryd. These houses are still experiencing subsidence problems 50 years on after being built. The planning committee are not in possession of the full facts of this application. You have been asked again to rubber stamp the malpractice and the negligence of the planning department. This was undertaken in 2008, but this was 3 years too late because it contradicted the plans already approved by a committee in 2005. The Cuddy group didn't care because their intention was never to build on the site. The approval for houses was a lost leader for Cuddy. It allowed them to tip without license. For every £1,000 they spent, they made £10,000 on tipping other people's waste material. To return to the current application, if the stream is tunnelled, then this creates a dam effect on Lower Bryn Hyfryd, thereby turning it into a basin. We should bear in mind that the stream is located on a major fault in the Earth's crust, and the earthquake we had in 2008 cracked a wall in my garden, which is next to the stream. The tunnel will measure around 400 metres, and if a similar occurrence happens in the future, should the tunnel crack, collapse, or become blocked, and it will turn Lower Bryn Hyfryd into a death trap that will place at least 10 houses under nearly 3 metres of water. There are serious conservation issues with the tunnelling of the stream. More importantly, it should be noted that the stream is a site of importance for natural conservation. Welsh Government legislation in 2015 and 2016
1 minute.
advises against such actions. The Future Generation Wales 2015 Act and Environment Wales 2016 Act places a duty of care to your council. Both the biodiversity officer and the developer's ecologist disagree with the planning department and have indicated that the stream should remain open. They are in a far better position to judge that no amount of nesting boxes and holes in fences in proposed conditions will mitigate the loss of habitat. The focus of planning has changed since 2005, when it was first suggested to tunnel the stream. Welsh Government legislation in 2015 and 2016 advises against such actions. The Future Generations Wales 2015 Act and Environment Wales 2016 Act places a duty of care on the council.
Right, I'm sorry, Mr. Richards, but that is the rules. You've had your 5 minutes. I have been very open with your comments, and I would like to say that they are just your own personal opinion rather than anything else. I mean, you're entitled to that, and that's what you've come here to say. So thank you very much. I will as previous speaker, come back to you for a short time at the end, just in case there's anything else you wish to say. So after that, we have Geraint John, who has the right of reply to that objection speech. So, Mr. Geraint John, you now have your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep my address to you all relatively brief, as obviously the recommendation is for approval. I'll also not comment in particular detail about some of the comments that Mr. Richards has raised about the integrity of the previous developer or indeed the current developer. I won't go into that because you all will know that's not a planning matter, but I can assure you that this is an opportunity to make good this site once and for all for much needed housing. That would be my opening remark. Generally then, therefore, as you'll see and be aware from the report, the proposal seeks amendments to a previous planning permission which has previously been approved and lawfully commenced on the site. This will bring about in the process considerable betterment. The proposal seeks to amend a couple of conditions, whilst other changes are proposed to the overall layout, including a reduction in number of units from 81 to 80, the removal of garages from the development and therefore a reduction in overall built form, subtle amendments to the proposed house types, extensive landscaping and replanting, an improved footway come cycleway to the southwest corner of the site. The principle of development at the site is of course acceptable, given that it has, as officers have pointed out, a long-standing planning history and indeed extant planning permission, and moreover given it's within the settlement boundary and of course is an allocated site for housing. In terms of impacts on neighbouring residential amenity and properties, the proposed layout is similar to that of the approved scheme, with small alterations that make it actually better. Extensive work has been undertaken to ensure there are no harmful impacts between any of the proposed dwellings or those on the existing dwellings bordering the site. As set out in the report, it's concluded there is no material harm arising as a result of this development proposal in residential amenity terms. A series of conditions are to be imposed which will further safeguard the amenity of existing residents during the construction and occupation stages of the development. In terms of access, the site will be accessed via hill or glen, as previously proposed, via a ghost island arrangement. Highway officers have no objection to this, nor the proposed access point. The scheme will result in a change in levels and will see the removal of the zigzag pedestrian footway in the southwestern corner of the site and will create an improved facility which is more level and usable. Details of this will be secured by condition. On the matter of landscaping and trees, the application has been supported by a series of extensive reports. Extensive landscape details have been submitted and agreed with officers, which will see significant replanting of native species throughout the site and will also see a newly reinforced hedge along the northern boundary. In terms of drainage, the site is not identified at risk of flooding. As a result of extremely detailed discussions with your council's drainage officers, the drainage proposal provides for a reduction in restricted discharge rates of surface water and an increase in on-site capacity storage. As a result, drainage officers have raised no objection and agree to the proposals. Coming then to land contamination, extensive and thorough reports have taken place at the site historically. These can be relied upon, but notwithstanding that, have been further updated and reassessed in considerable detail. The site has an extant planning permission, which resulted in a significant volume of fill material being imported with changed site levels. This material, however, will be removed from the site.
1 minute.
Thank you. Extensive dialogue has taken place between the applicant's advisors and your contaminated land officer, and this matter can be adequately dealt with and mitigated. So to conclude, the proposal seeks to amend a previous lawfully implemented permission, and it delivers a housing allocation. There are no objections in any respect from officers or statutory consultees to a raft of issues, and for these reasons it's respectively requested that the application be approved in line with officers' recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. John. Right. What I would normally do now is go to the local members, but because Councillor Morgan has indicated that he's having problems, I do want to have his input, and the other, I'll come to the other ones later. So Councillor Del Morgan, I know you have submitted a representation, but please come and address committee.
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Fingers crossed the connection is still holding. Can I start by apologising that I haven't seen the amendment sheet, but from what I've heard, if the amendments are relating to conditions which reinforce those points that I have been making as my submission, then of course I'd be very happy with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I then just go on to say that as members will now be clearly aware, this application refers to a site that already has planning permission in place.
Breaking up this.
That means that. All right, I'll try slower. So extant consent, meaning that if members turn down this application today, the situation reverts to that of the previous consent. So the options are approve according to the officer's recommendation with conditions, or reject the application. In my mind, it's clearly better to accept the conditions that are being put before members now, 40 odd conditions, which give the council a chance to go through detailed points of protection for local community, and that's much better than reverting to what was in place previously. I would urge members to take on board the concerns of us as local members, and of course the residents of Neath over the years, to ensure that the conditions do include and encompass those aspects that I've listed in my submission to the committee. Now, these include, briefly, sufficient test borings to be carried out in order to alleviate fears about what may be buried in the land.
Mm-hmm.
Borings do need to go down at least to the original levels of the site. Secondly, with regard to the drainage aspects need to be resolved properly. I will ask for that stream that runs behind numbers 56 to 66 Bryn Hyfryd to be considered as a special case. Residents are quite correct to be concerned, and I'm going to ask that any culvert proposed for this area be put in place with an additional on-surface drainage channel alongside in order to mitigate the effects of extreme weather conditions. Thirdly, I ask that the conditions include proper controls over the access via Woodland Park so that no additional traffic issues will arise as a result of the planning permission. Lastly, I'd wish to insist that there's a minimal cull on trees in and around the site, and that additional trees be planted in accordance with the needs of the local environment. So with those conditions and those additional things in place, I'd be happy to support the proposals before members today. I would look forward to a professional and coordinated approach to the development of housing on this site, which has been anticipated for decades and decades, actually. And I would say, please, members, support the recommendations with all those conditions that have been listed and with my additional caveats from what I've just been adding today. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Councillor Morgan. I'm glad that we were able to hear your submission. Mr. Ball, do you want to come back on any of those comments made there or requests?
I think some of those it might be worth coming back to when we've had all the different comments, because I think that Mo, our pollution control officer, will be able to cover things to look at the test borings. Yeah. Terry will be able to comment about the drainage issue. I'll be honest, I don't believe at the moment that it's got additional on-site drainage channel proposed, but Terry will be able to give some advice about the necessity or otherwise for that. The only thing I would say in terms of Councillor Morgan talking about the minimal cull of trees, I think Councillor Noyle will probably reference this shortly anyway, but the amendment sheet does emphasise that the majority of trees on this site are scheduled to be taken out, even though they are the subject of a tree preservation order which was imposed 30 years ago on an area basis. Just to clarify, what I advised Councillor Noyle is that the area basis was effectively a dotted line around the whole of the site imposed at that time prior to any grant of plan permission at the site. And that's the kind of thing that definitely used to happen as a catch-all, effectively put a blanket TPO on and then look at the impacts later. So there was an approval in early 90s that effectively required removal of some trees. Then the 2003 and subsequent 2010 consent, similarly, clearly to facilitate that development, the change in levels required the removal of the majority, if not all of the trees on that site as well. But the problem we had on those consents is we didn't have the detailed drawings that indicated every single tree on the site and every single one to be taken off. So there is a degree of, kind of an information gap, shall we say. What we have on this application now, in liaison with Geraint John's team, is tree surveys and a landscaping plan that indicates the removal of those trees necessary to facilitate the access and vision displays and generally the houses around them because of the change in levels. But as a consequence of the loss of the majority of those trees, which is regrettable, we have required additional landscape and planting, particularly on the northern boundaries, and hedgerows to be planted along there as well to try and mitigate the loss of those trees. And what I've said to Councillor Noyle is I know he had concerns and probably still does have concerns that when you have a tree preservation order, how can you then allow those trees to go? But what I've identified is when you have TPOs, you either have an application under the tree preservation order itself to do works or to remove a tree, or you have the planning application process, which considers, in this case, the loss of trees protected in the round as part of the planning process. And if we feel that a development is acceptable and the weight to be attached to the development outweighs any impact on in terms of loss of trees, for example, then ultimately the planning permission gives the consent necessary to remove those trees, irrespective of whether they're covered by the tree preservation order. So it is regrettable in terms of some of the loss. I think one of the things with this site as a whole is we are bound by the 30 years of complex history of the site and the consents that have been in place for this before. So both in terms of the loss of the culvert and the loss of the loss of the stream and the culverting thereof, and the loss of trees generally, we are left in a situation where we do have has been implemented, and therefore, while we might have done things differently if this was a brand new fresh piece of paper, it isn't a fresh piece of paper, and we are working within the constraints of the planning history. So on that basis and within that context, that's why we've reached the decision that this is acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Councillor Morgan, I'm going to go to Councillor Noyle now, because I do obviously think that you probably have similar questions. And then when we go to officers, they will be able to answer them both. Is that all right with you?
Thank you, yes.
Okay. Councillor Noyle then, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Steve, and everybody who's spoken on this. I think it's one of the most complex issues we've had. Well, myself, I've had to deal with as a councillor since I've started in 2017. I will say that I think Steve and Nicola in particular, we've had extensive discussions over the last maybe 12 to 18 months regarding this site, and in particular some of the items that have been mentioned. I will support Del on the 4 conditions that he suggested, but I want to talk about them as well and raise my concerns if I can. Obviously, within the papers that we've received, there's a consultation with the Gleaney Town Council, of which I'm chair, and we have a concern about the illegal tipping of potential chemical waste. My condition request would be in line with what Della suggested, and that we have additional ground surveys done prior to the works commencing, so that we can understand what is exactly on the site. I think that would go a long way to pleasing most of the residents who've raised that as a concern. Trees, likewise. I actually want to thank Enzo, who I met on site, and have had several discussions with him on the phone. He actually mentioned, well, we talked about the trees, and he actually mentioned to me that he wouldn't be taking any trees down. I was very surprised when I saw the latest drawing, the soft landscaping proposal drawing come through this morning. In regards to trees, I had Steve, Mr. Ball and I had a chat this morning, obviously, about those trees, and he's explained the TPO. I'm a little bit concerned. I think I'd like to ask if we can put a condition on that we actually review the site and those trees that are due to come down, particularly in the northern corner and the southwestern corners. The northern corner, there are houses which are going to be overlooking the site. They obviously will have an impact there of visual amenity, and in the southwestern corner the same, but this site will overlook their houses. So I'd like to see if we can do something with that, please. We mentioned about the drainage and obviously the issues surrounding the drainage there and potential culverting. I'd like to ask, in terms of the drainage, have the drainage proposals that have been put forward, and I understand obviously there'll be some storm cells or the like there to hold the water on site, but have we considered the impact areas of Neath that this site will now have, and whether the infrastructure will have the capacity to take the additional discharge that's going to come off 88 new houses? So that'll be a question I want to ask. Just going back to the ground contaminants, if I can ask Mo, in terms of ground condition surveys, have any been done since 2010? I think I'm right in saying Terra Firma have done a more recent ground condition survey. I might be wrong on that, but I'd like to understand that. I have one other question which relates to the section 106, and if I can come back afterwards because I might have forgotten something. In terms of the section 106, I hear what Mr. Ball is saying about that, but I would be a little bit not concerned. I don't know if I'm allowed to, or if we're allowed to do anything with it, but obviously section 106 notices give communities opportunities from developments such as this to help the public and open spaces. And I think the potential to help the community of Neath with this development by a section 106 would be good. I don't know if we can add that in as a condition or not, but that's something I wanted to ask. Chair, I think that covers me for the minute. If I can come back afterwards, please.
No problem, Councillor Niall. We will come back to local members at the end. Okay, now we have had a couple of councillors that have submitted questions. I know Councillor Del Morgan was one, and we've heard from him. Who was the other one? I'm sorry, I've forgotten at the moment. Or was the two local members, wasn't it? Yeah, okay. Right, I had an indication from Councillor Bamsey that he would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to support the two local members for the extra conditions that they would like to add. The one in particular for me is around the possible contamination of the land. I know Steve, as we mentioned earlier, he's not currently satisfied with the condition of the land, and we don't fully understand it, given its history. So I'd fully support Del's suggestion that we do a complete survey of the land prior to any work starting. I just feel
that is actually in the conditions, but I leave it to the pollution officer to explain that. And I think it's now time basically to call on Mr. Mohammed to actually answer a few of the concerns that have been raised so far, either by the contamination. So would you be able to allay councillors' fears and explain the conditions that are already attached to this application?
Well, thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, before more, again, you're not reading the comments. I did ask to speak before Councillor Bamsey as well. It is down there in the...
Oh, I am so sorry. So you have a question for me, right? Okay.
Yeah,
then.
because
well, you first.
why I wanted to speak first, so more can deal with them all in one go then.
I am appreciating that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I thank the both local members. I think they've made excellent points. And can I thank Mr. Ball and Kerry Morris for my pre-questions reports and their responses. They go a long way to alleviate some of the concerns I may have had. However, both Del and Simon have, as Councillor Bamsey mentioned, have raised very good points. I wanted more to ask him if he believes that the conditions and the surveys and everything that's in this report are robust enough to alleviate the concerns of those living there from flooding. We all know that flooding has become one of our top priorities across Neath and Port Talbot, and we do not want to add another site to something that may be out of our control with the weather. So obviously more attention and information to deal with that for those coming off the site, I would suggest. But the contamination, I'm not going to judge anybody or the previous developers or who have actually tipped on that site. But I think it is, again, very important that we understand. And I don't think Mo at this stage is going to have the answers. So I would also, after hearing from him, if possible, come back, because I think we do need to know exactly, and not just for the residents where there's a health issue, but for the environment. I mean, we all have been told the environment is so important. So anything that's on that site, we really do need to be made aware of. And I know it's a difficult one, and I know Del suggested boreholes and so forth, but I'm going to ask, Chair, with your permission, the expert, Mo, to cover those points as well, so that we as members know what to do today when we vote. So thank you for that.
That's fine.
I appreciate you allowing me.
Yeah, I apologise. I missed you on the chat there, Councillor Hunt. I'm so sorry. Right then, we will go to the pollution officer, Mo, who I hope will have some of the answers to alleviate the concerns or the questions that councillors have raised so far.
All right, thank you, Chair. Regards to Councillor Hunt and the flooding question that he had.
Yeah.
Flooding is not an area of my expertise that I actually can comment on. So my comments will be mainly related to contaminated land and human health.
Pollution issues, then, yeah.
Okay, so so I go over a little bit of the history of the site just to help answer Councillor Noyle's question about the site investigations that have been done in the past.
Yeah.
There was a site investigation in 2008, which was limited sampling, quite shallow sampling, and there was no asbestos sampling done at that time. Then in 2019, in January and in March, Terra Firma did further sampling on site. Again, the sampling, in my opinion, wasn't sufficient. It was quite localized. Most of the samples were at the shallow depth. And although they did asbestos monitoring sampling in the testing, to me, it wasn't enough because considering the site as a whole. So the conditions that I've recommended have been ones that are to fully characterize the site, which would be for human health, environment, as Councillor Hunt has mentioned, and the conditions, the way they are written, the site investigation and the death study would mean that they would have to, in order to fully characterize the site, they would have to do testing at shallow level and at the deeper level. So which would mean drilling down to the natural up to where the depth of the main ground to understand what we have on site. From the reports that I've seen so far, I've not seen any indication of there's been any sort of illegal tipping. All I've just seen so far is slightly elevated levels of contamination, but these levels that I've seen so far are nothing that would be of major concern in a normal development anywhere in the borough.
Okay.
And they're quite easily to be. The levels that we've got are quite easy to be mitigated.
Right. Okay. So the councillors that asked the question, Councillor Hunt and Councillor Noyle, I'll come to Councillor Hunt first. Are you sufficiently calmed by what the pollution officer says?
Yeah, Chair, yes. And I think when he says getting it down to the level that both members were hoping for is a good thing.
Okay.
However, and I appreciate his comments. He's not aware, and I wasn't suggesting illegal, but the contractor who had the landfill license, as the resident spoke about, it probably wasn't monitored, was what was going in there by the lorries, and that was my concern when he mentioned the deep-rooted drilling, is because we really do not understand what might be on this site, and that's my question. We need to alleviate the concerns. We need to know what's on the site for everybody, environment impact and resident impact. So I am still happy if that type of thing Del and Simon mentioned is carried out. And
Okay.
I'm happy then, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Noyle. Are you calmed by what you've heard from the pollution officer?
Maybe not calmed.
I think
Chair.
basically what he's saying is that you're not saying that there isn't contamination on the site. What he is saying is that he is not happy with the surveys up to now, and that he has conditioned into this application that would have to be satisfied. He would have to be satisfied before building work could proceed. So Mo, am I characterising what you're saying?
Chair, that's perfect. That's exactly what
All right.
we're after.
Simon?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and if I can just clarify specifically to Mr. John, who's here on behalf of the applicant today, and I have spoken to the applicant as well and told him this, that I would be firmly in favour of the development, so long as we could, from our Neath Talbot County Borough Council perspective, close off all of the issues that concerns that we have. One of those being ground contaminants, and as long as we can prove that at the levels which obviously the plateau which is there, which is going to be cut and filled to help with the levels on site, once that is excavated and spread, that we take the samples at the right levels to prove if there are or are not any contaminants. I understand that you can remediate ground and you can build on it, which is a different issue almost. This is to determine whether the ground has any carcinogenics or anything like that could be harmful to the local residents and the like when the construction works are ongoing. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Del Morgan, are you happy with the response from the pollution officer?
Yes, Chair. More mentioned specifically test boring at shallow and deeper levels, right down to the original ground levels, which is what I was asking for. And as Simon has just said now, of course, the timing of it is important. I didn't mention it earlier, but I was actually very pleased to see that the current plan proposes to take away the bulk of all the excess material, which is a new thing, because for years we've expected the that mountain to remain there, which was crazy. Now that it's going to be taken away, I think the test borings need to happen at a time which is sensible in relation to after that material is gone. Because if you test now, then you're shifting things around. So that's all I got to say. But Moore has certainly alleviated the the original concerns. Thank you.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. Okay, just to clarify the situation now, I've got the Vice Chair indicated to speak. I've got Mr. Ball indicated to speak and 3 others. So, Tammy, can you tell me who the 3 others are? Because I can't see here.
Yes, certainly. No, it's just the 4 you mentioned. I got Councillor Wilcock. Did you mention Councillor?
No, I didn't. Right. Okay.
Oh, okay. So
I'd like to come back as well, Chair, if possible, please.
Yeah, Councillor
Bamsey.
Councillor Bamsey, Councillor Mason and Steve Ball, Chair.
Right. I'll come back to Councillor Bamsey. Is it something that you've, when you asked the question, you want to further say?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay, then go ahead.
The condition that I was looking at was condition 39.
Yeah.
Which basically says
what
that.
Page is that on? Sorry.
Page 49 of the
Lovely,
report.
thank you.
Which, outline it just basically if when work commences, that if they do find something, obviously work will stop and it'll be looked into, which is great. But I just wonder, I know Moore said that conditions is in place that these tests will carry out prior to any work. So I'm just thinking of protecting any potential workers on site who could find asbestos, etc. Just wondering what number condition it is I'm struggling to find it. I am.
What, that would protect workers?
That refers to testing carrying out prior to any sort of work commencing.
Mr. Ball,
36.
help on that one. 36, is it?
36.
Yes, Chair. I mean, condition 36 through to 39 of land contamination conditions. I mean, in terms of condition 39, Councillor Bamsey, that is the unexpected contamination condition. It is a standard condition. I couldn't give you a percentage, but so many applications have potential contamination in our area. Majority of them very little or nothing there, but these conditions are often imposed because of potential concerns. And Mo will say, Mo is consulted on loads of applications, and we often put these conditions on, one of which is unexpected contamination, i.e. you can do everything you can to identify what the issues are and what is there, what the risks are, and what you need to do to remediate them. But that doesn't mean that when something's been done on the site, that something crops up that hasn't been expected, because there's only so much you can do. This covers that off in an adequate way, and as I say, it is a standard condition that not only do we put on, but pretty much all authorities that deal with land contamination in Wales do. And condition 36 is the first one that requires effectively the further work we're talking about, and Mo's gone into Mo has liaised with the applicant or the applicant's specialist on this, who's been undertaking additional work, and has emphasised everything that he needs to be done to satisfy himself that we have the full picture necessary to then create the remediation scheme that they need to implement to make development acceptable at the site. So Mo's emphasised he's happy. I'm obviously happy because Mo's happy, and I would hope that you're happy because the conditions are happy that it does what Mo wants.
No, great. Thanks for that. Yeah, I can see 39 is like an extra measure, so yeah, I'm happy with that.
It's a sort of catch-all, Councillor Bam.
Yeah.
If anything comes up that we weren't aware of, that 39 catches it.
And just Chair, just since I'm on, so to speak, the only point I was going to make in response to one of the earlier questions was of note, we were talking about the not only contamination, but remember that quite a lot of material on site is now going to be taken off site as well. It was brought onto site in accordance with a licence, and it will need to be taken off somewhere in accordance with a licence. I know Enzo has shared some details of where that would go, although that's not really a matter for planning to worry about, but he's seeking to emphasise that he is doing things the right way in terms of taking stuff off the site, and ultimately the conditions would ensure that whatever's left on the site is free or is remediated appropriately to serve the residential use.
Thank you, Mr. Ball.
Thank you.
Vice Chair, then, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Some of this has been addressed in some of the responses to Councillor Bamsey and others. I just wanted to draw attention to members to the conditions 36 to 39 and the nature in which they address the land contamination. I think it's all been picked up in various responses so far. But condition number 36 is referring to those site investigations which Mo and others have talked about taking place. We've got condition 37, which covers the remediation, so whatever is found, how that's going to be dealt with. Condition 36 talks about no development commencing until those investigations have been submitted and approved by us. Condition 37 covers the same issue with regards to the remediation. So that's the council agreeing to the remediation of any contamination. And then 38 is another interesting one, which involves us actually having a verification report to prove the effectiveness of the remediation work that's carried out as well. So that's a further safeguard, identifying the contamination, how is it going to be remediated, and then before the site is occupied, check in that remediation work has been done appropriately. And then obviously we've addressed 39, which Scott brought up around anything that's picked up as unexpected. So I just wanted to kind of bring members through all those conditions just in one go just to cover off some of those concerns.
Lovely. Thank you, Vice Chair. Great. Now, I've got lots of people indicating they want to speak or come back. I'm going to address Councillor Hunt. I do hear what you're saying about your flooding issue, but because we're on pollution at the moment, I'd like to just stay with that, and then we'll go back to the water flooding issue after that. You won't let me forget, I know. So I've got, is Councillor Williams or Woolcock? Because I've only got W. Who is it that was used to speak? Councillor Wilcock, is it?
Councillor Woolcock, Chair.
Oh, thank you. And then I'll call on Councillor Misen, and then we'll see where we are. Okay. Councillor Woolcock.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to acknowledge the comments that you made right at the start of this particular agenda item with regards to the document that we received yesterday as planning members.
Right.
And I do note, that it was too late for consideration today, which I fully accept. But I also received some legal advice yesterday as well when I received this particular document. Excuse me, because I was quite concerned actually with the tone and the unfortunate language used therein. I think it bordered really on defamatory. I also noticed that the use of the council's logo with another defamatory statement below it. However, reiterating what I've just said, I come back to your point that it's not for consideration today, and I'm sure that those particular issues can be dealt with in another place, and I'm sure they will. Coming back to the land contamination issue, then I note, and it has been mentioned, Chair, that on page 36 there it does say that a proportion of the fill will be removed. I'm just wondering, Chair, that coming back to the point that Councillor Del Morgan, as one of the local members, mentioned earlier on, that we do need perhaps to allay any fears that the public may have with regard to contamination, that it would be necessary to go down to the natural ground level. Well, then surely if a proportion of this material is going to be removed, it's going to be making it easier to get deeper down to the natural ground level to undertake those particular checks. If indeed that there are any contaminants discovered at that lower level, then wouldn't it be prudent to remove all the fill that's been placed in there and import the material that's required for the land and ground levels? So that's my question there, Chair. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll go to Mo then to answer. Would that be necessary in your opinion? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, Chair.
No, that's fine.
That's more of a development issue, to be honest. Whether they keep the soil on site or whether they decide to remove the soil and bring in new soil, that's all. It's more of a development issue. From my point of view, is to ensure that whatever materials on site is suitable for use. And if it isn't suitable for use, we find a way of making it suitable for use. So with Councillor Woolcock's comments about is it better to take the soil off site, that's not really for me. It'd be more for the developer and the financial implications of what they want to do.
I presume we wouldn't want to add any financial, points on the development if they weren't necessary. So what you're actually saying is, we'll have a look at what's there. They have to do it to my satisfaction. How they do it is up to them.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Removing soil off site is expensive, so a lot of developers just try not to do that if they can.
I see. Okay.
Chair.
Councillor Woolcock, are you? I'll just come back to that now. Councillor Woolcock, are you happy with that response?
To a point, Jay. I mean, if you remove some of the top layers of this imported material, and you find that the lower levels are actually contaminated, we don't know whether they are, but if they are, then surely it would make sense even for the developer. And if it's not a matter for Mr. Mohammed, department, surely it would make sense to remove that if it is contaminated soil. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I would presume, Councillor Wilcock, that it would be how they could satisfy Mo's requests and assure him that the site is actually clear of contaminants to his satisfaction. So, as I say, I would leave it that he would insist that it is satisfied to his satisfaction, and let the developer find the mode of doing that. Really, find, you know, they're the ones that have to do the satisfying. So it's up to them how they do it, but they won't be able to build unless Mr. Mohammed is actually satisfied.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, that's
Chair.
fine.
Chair.
Yes. Sorry.
If I may just add very briefly to that.
Oh, I mean, Mr. Ball, right.
Sorry, as I said in the presentation, I mean, there was a Natural Resources Wales license for the importation of this material, which would have been inert material. I know there's been allegations that the developer did more than that they are definitely unproven allegations. The work that we've talked about would require an assessment to make sure we are happy, but they are taking stuff off the site. And in general terms, and I don't think it's a matter for us, but in general terms, they're unlikely to be moving off lots of clean material to go to a site and leaving all the contaminated material necessary. They're going to be looking at it to make sure that if they need material for the site, they're going to be retaining what they need. Now, ultimately, Mo will require the sufficient detail to make sure that he is wholly satisfied with the information and the remediation scheme. But you're right, from a developer's perspective, given that stuff's going to come off the site, it would suggest that they will do the right thing in terms of understanding what is on the site, primarily because from a developer perspective, it means they can make the right choices for their site to make sure it's a clean and appropriate and remediated site at least cost to them.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Misen, could I ask, is your question on pollution or something else?
Well, not so much a question, Chair. It's just a little statement I think to say us all. It's just nothing in particular. I just, you know, the health of the present residents and any future residents there on the building site is obviously a major, is paramount, you know. So I welcome Mo and Del and Simon's thoughts that we should do the deeper exploration to a level where there could well be contaminants. That's what I want to do.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to ask questions on the pollution? Because I'm aware that there are still flooding issues and watercourse issues to be questioned. So I think thank you, Mo. We may have to come back to you, but at the moment we'll stand by on that one. So Del Morgan and Councillor Stephen Hunt both have indicated that they wish to speak about culvert or flooding issues. So I'll come to Councillor Hunt first and then Del Morgan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm sure Del will cover it, or Simon, the local members. But given the history of flooding, and as I mentioned earlier, are we robust enough with the current flood proposal model for this site? Because I know Steve Ball and Kerry and others do take flooding quite seriously, and we mustn't make a mistake. We know across the county borough, which we haven't got the investment or money, Chair, that some of our old system pipes are not adequate enough for flash flooding, and therefore they're not blocked. They just overfill and flood our particular county borough. So when you've got a developer going to go ahead with such an expansive project, I'm sure flooding is right up there. I have no doubt that Mr. Ball and his team would look at this properly, but I just want to know what sort of flooding model or flood risk assessments are on site, and what they're proposing to make sure that those in the vicinity do not get flooded from this particular site. We can't talk about flash floods from the heavens opening up across the county borough, but we could certainly not add to any risk of flooding to the vicinity in and around this particular project. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'll go to Del Morgan as well, and then I'll go back to officers because it's probably going to raise the similar questions. Del Morgan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just, well, basically, we're waiting to see what officers are coming back with. I believe Terry Davis was going to come back with comments on my request so that any culvert that is imposed by condition, or I think it's extant consent anyway for a culvert, but that is supplemented with an on-surface drainage, so that in extreme weather conditions, the culvert may not actually take the water sufficiently. There'd be an additional on-surface drainage facility there as well. That's what I was asking. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Ball, you care to comment on those comments?
I think generally speaking, it's probably worth bringing Terry in to
right. Okay.
To cover something. I mean, there is a condition that requires details of the surface water drainage proposals, and when Councillor Hunt talks about flooding, this isn't a flooding site in the strictest sense of the word, in terms of it's not identified by TAN 15 as a site that is subject to it. So therefore, there's no need for a flood consequences assessment or anything of the sort. I think what you're referring to, Councillor Hunt, is more the concerns of the community to make sure that this development doesn't make development any worse in terms of surface water drainage. And Terry can advise. I'm sure Terry will confirm that he is satisfied that the details that have come in to date demonstrate that there would be, no unacceptable impact that couldn't be addressed. And he's also required through the condition, I believe, that the surface water drainage coming onto the site is dealt with on site to ensure. And I know that Geraint John in his submission said about the additional attenuation area. So Terry, perhaps you can give the more technical answer to address those concerns, please.
Yeah, I'll be happy for that to happen. Thank you, Terry.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon.
In terms of the queries raised by the local members, I'd suggest that I take on board Councillor Morgan and his overland flood route, we would call it from a technical point of view.
Right.
Currently, the culvert on the watercourse has been agreed in principle in terms of the planning application. The technical detail of that culvert is going to be decided. It will require ordinary watercourse consent, which is a separate process undertaken by the authority as the lead local flood authority. This will involve our highways and drainage team assessing all proposals provided by the applicant to ensure that the design of the culvert does not exacerbate any flooding issues in the area. The culvert will be designed in accordance with all relevant guidance. It will be designed for the 1 in 100 plus 30% event. As with the surface water system, the storage on that site will be designed for the 1 in 100 plus 30%, which is probably will be discharging less water into the watercourse than in its current situation. The terms of the existing culverts, they are going to be designed for that 1 in 100 plus 30% event. As with all culverts, the inlet structures particular attention will be taken on the design of the inlet structure. The overland flood route, if it can be incorporated in the current levels of the site, then that will be a point of consideration for the ordinary watercourse consent procedure, because it is a valid point and it will be closely looked at as part of that process. We have existing highway drainage going into the area, I believe to the rear of close to the rear of Mr. Richards's property. We will have to incorporate the design of that culvert to make allowances for the levels of that incoming highway drain, which has statutory rights to be there, which hopefully will improve the current situation on Bryn Hyfryd.
Yeah.
I think basically that's all I can say is that in terms of the culvert design, that will be dealt with under ordinary watercourse consent procedure, and it will be thoroughly examined by the authority's drainage design team, and we will ensure that it meets all current modern standards. In terms of the on-site surface water system for the houses and the road, that's being dealt with through the planning process. and they will have to provide sufficient attenuation to comply with the greenfield runoff rate for that site if it hadn't been developed, and that for the 1 in 100 plus 30% event. And there's not a lot more I could actually say regarding that matter.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. I can see that from the chat, Councillor Steve Hunt wants to come back. I can also see that there's been a little bit of a discussion between our guest and Mr. Ball. The chat function is basically really to draw attention to the chair that they wish to speak. So we don't normally put anything other than that on the chat, Mr. Richard. So that's what the chat is there for. That's why you've had that comment. So Councillor Hunt wants to come back, and I know Councillor Keogh has been waiting an awful long time, and I will come to you. So Councillor Hunt, you want to come back on that flooding issue?
Yes, I'll be very brief. Thank you, Terry, for a more comprehensive understanding of how to mitigate those local residents, and obviously the whole site. They don't want to be flooded either. But can I just ask, separately to planning, is SARS being implemented on this site as the flooding concerns and runoff waters? Because it's key for members perhaps to understand the complexity of that new legislation that was brought in by Welsh Government. Maybe this might be their first opportunity to have you to explain, because it's very key that we do the right things by everybody in this development. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Justin, are you able to give an update on
Well,
SARS to members?
I think in terms of the requirement for SARBs, because the application, the nature of the application, it doesn't require SARB approval.
Right.
Because of the extant consent and and that's basically it.
Okay. Councillor Hunt, you had your question answered. Okay.
Yeah, Chair, just very quickly then, I'm holding you up again, I do apologise.
Yeah, I got a couple of people who haven't spoken.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I'm disappointed that this new, because of, you mentioned the extent application has been passed previously, but I think as it hasn't been built, I really think that would have really alleviated. I know it's a cost, and I think that was mentioned, Chair, but I think SARBs should be introduced on this site. I don't know if it's within the planning authority's powers, but that is a very complete process of making sure runoff water and drainage systems are functioning properly. I'm only putting it in there, I am. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Councillor Hunt. I think on that point, the officer has said it's not required on this application, and that's one of the complexities of dealing with such an old application, is that things have changed in the meantime, and because of when it was approved, we are caught between a rock and a hard place sometimes. Okay. So Councillor Keogh, who has patiently waited for ages, I do apologise. Councillor Keogh.
Thank you, Chair. May I remind some of our guests today that our officers are very highly qualified people. Unlike Steve, some of us who sit on this committee have been here for a very long time, myself 17 years.
Yes.
But I would remind Mr. David Richards that during this conversation, he has been on screen the entire time. We can see his reactions, and I would remind him that this conversation is recorded and will later be released for public. So we could see everything you do.
Thank you very much, Councillor Keogh. Well said. Okay. Right. Is there an outstanding question or comment? No? Sorry, I'm just going to lower that hand for you. Councillor Keogh's gone. Okay. Right. If that's the case, I will just like to sort of sum up here. I think I said it a long time ago during the debate. What we have here is a very old standing application, and it does cross over from different legislations coming in. But I think the choice here is to approve this application with the conditions and possibly, well, not possibly, very definitely improve the site, because our pollution officer and our drainage officers, our planning officers are going to be eagle-eyed over what happens next. And they will make sure that, as the local members are keen to do, the residents of Neath Talbot get a very good new estate, houses which are desperately needed everywhere throughout the county borough. But this site in particular, I do believe Neath is in need of some new housing stock. So bear in mind that these are professional officers that we employ. We have to use their professionalism at all times, and they have recommended approval with the conditions. Now, we're not saying that there isn't any contamination on the site. We're not saying that anything isn't there that other people have mentioned. What we're saying is, if you approve the conditions today, they will be managed, the site will be improved, and we will provide housing. So that's basically where I am. I'm going to now go to the recommendation, which is on page 50, or does it? Sorry, I wrote it down. Tammy, can you help me? Page of the recommendation.
I'll have a amendment sheet.
It's on page 39, isn't it?
Apologies, Chair, I haven't got that.
No, it was on the amendment sheet. It should have been there at page 39, and the amendment sheet actually says this is the recommendation to approve with conditions at page 39. Rebecca, did you indicate then?
I think there's a point that Councillor Noyle is stating he hasn't had addressed yet on the chat.
I do beg your pardon, Councillor Noyle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beck.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just on two things. One regarding the trees. I don't think we've had a full and final discussion on the trees, and my point regarding the section 106 that I brought up. I don't know if this is the right or appropriate time. No problem.
It's been a long morning. Okay.
I know, and you've handled it very well, Chair, can I say?
The trees issue, Mr. Ball.
Yes, thank you. I did have things down. I was going to try and comment on things. Thank you for bringing it up, Councillor Noyle. In terms of the section 106, you talk about opportunities to help public open space via 106, and could we add by condition? We can't add by condition because that's not how those things are dealt with, because in this case it would be financial contribution. We haven't sought a contribution from the developer in this case because the 2010 consent didn't have a requirement for a contribution. So therefore, we don't feel that we can sustain what would effectively be a refusal if they fail to provide that money because of that. It may be something in that context that you may wish to again liaise with Enzo direct to see whether there's anything outside of the planning process that he would do. Normally, a development of this would be expected to provide either on-site open space, or probably in this case we might well have required a contribution towards off-site POS. I don't feel I can say that we should do it today, because ultimately if you ask for it and he says no, then I couldn't tell you that we can refuse on that basis, because it wouldn't be sustainable. But you've got a good relationship, I think, in terms of the being able to talk to the developer, and I think yourself and or Councillor Morgan may wish to engage in that regard, to see if there's any benefit for public open space that he may wish to introduce. In terms of the trees, you asked if we could review the loss of trees, especially the northern corner. And I know we talked about this issue before. In terms of the conditions that were placed on at the moment, in terms of prior to the amendment sheet, they required. I'm trying to find it now. Sorry. Condition 30 required, and I'll summarise. But condition 30, as within your report on page 46, required prior to occupation of the first dwelling, and notwithstanding any submitted details, full details of a hard and soft landscaping scheme. And it did talk about incorporating details of all trees to be retained wherever practicable, blah, 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 in terms of providing planting, etc. Now, that was included at a time when we didn't have the degree of clarity necessary between the plans. We now have had the landscaping plan that I shared on the screen, and we've talked about today and separately, myself and you, Councillor Noyle. That does indicate that trees in that northern corner you're talking about would be due for removal. Now, as it stands, the amendment sheet says that officers are generally satisfied with the landscaping submissions and therefore recommending changes to those conditions. I guess if members weren't happy with those submissions and felt that more consideration should be given to retain trees in the northern corner, they could say, well, no, we still want to retain the condition 30 as originally drafted, so that a further landscaping scheme has to come in. But I think our recommendation is that the schemes that come in is acceptable. But again, maybe, you know, direct liaison between the adjoining landowner, who I think is expressing concern, and Councillor Noyle or Councillor Morgan with Enzo Homes may come to a solution in that corner to retain any trees that might be practicable to retain. So the question really for members is, do they want to keep condition 30 largely as it is, that requires more submissions to be given to us, or do they agree with officers that the landscaping scheme showing those removal is acceptable? Do you understand that, Chair?
Yeah, I understand. I'm just wondering if the councillor is happy. Councillor Noyle?
Do you know what? I saw him running away from his screen, and I wonder whether his battery's just gone.
Oh, right. Okay, well, yeah, well, we'll move on and we'll come back to him if it's a short interlude. I can see that Councillor Morgan wanted to thank Terry. Is it quick, Councillor Morgan?
Yes, please, Chair. I wasn't sure whether you were going to call me right back at the very end, but just to say I'm grateful for some of the responses I've had. The 4 points I wanted to add to or emphasise within the conditions, one was to do with test boring, and I'm very grateful to Mo for his explanation. That can be taken forward. In terms of the drainage, I do want to thank Terry for his detailed explanation.
Lovely. Okay.
And I can see that he's mentioned be considered. With regard to section 106, can I just say there was back in the 1980s one in place, which was about £30,000 worth of benefit to the community. Of course, that's lapsed.
Yes.
So there is ground for discussion there. With regards to the trees, I would certainly ask for members to go along with further investigations to see if we can salvage more than rather than less. Everything else I think is taken care of in the conditions, Chair. So thank you very much indeed.
Councillor Morgan. Councillor Noyle, I know you've spoken several times, but do you have anything else to add? Oh, he's gone, hasn't he? Yeah.
No, I'm back. I'm back. Sorry,
okay.
I had technical issues there. Thank you. Yeah. All I was going to say, and I didn't catch the end of Mr. Ball's response there, sorry, is whether we could actually, and I think Del just mentioned it there in what he said, maybe take a view on each tree on its own individual merits, because there are some trees there which are important to some residents in the way they are northwest and southwest corners. But whether we could do that outside of the and with some informal discussions with Mr. John and Mr. Enzo, perhaps, would be the right way to do it. Thanks.
Steve, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you probably missed the end, Simon, but ultimately what I said is Geraint and John Planning have submitted the amended landscape scheme that shows removal of trees. It may well be that the one or ones in that northern corner could be saved potentially. There are two ways forward in that. One is that you and Councillor Morgan maybe and the landowner have those discussions with the developer direct. And I'm fairly, Enzo has given his assurance to you that in terms of retention, and I'm sure that he would stand by his word in seeking to retain trees where possible. The alternative is that a member in this committee effectively says that they are concerned that there are still trees being taken down which don't have to be taken down, and I can't say that's certain, but given what you're saying, Councillor Noyle, and they may say that they would actually wish to retain conditions 30 as originally drafted on page 46, and not to include the landscaping plan within the new revised condition 2. And that would then need Geraint John Planning and the agent to submit a new landscaping scheme to us. which they could then say whether or not they can retain those trees. So that is open to members to accede to your request effectively to say, no, can we have a bit more investigation?
Yeah, I can see Councillor Percy wants to come in. Also, as I say, it would require a member of the committee to put that forward as a possible amendment. So, Councillor Vice Chair, please.
Thanks, Chair. So just for clarity then, Steve, what you're saying is the current plan that's been submitted, the alternative suggestion would be to keep the condition as drafted. Effectively, they'd have to submit another plan, and perhaps we could suggest that would be done in conjunction with consultation with the local members, and then submit effectively the same plan, but potentially with some retained trees if it was possible. Is that what we're getting at? I'm just trying to understand what burden we might be putting on the developer with any change.
Yes, I mean, in general terms, what the developer and his agents have been trying to do, to their credit, is they want to get on site as soon as practically possible. And what we as officers have been trying to do is twofold. One is to try and get this matter to committee at an appropriate time when we are satisfied that it can be brought before you, and we are satisfied in that respect. But there are still a number of conditions that are required to be satisfied before they can actually get digging and get started. And if I'm honest, I know that Enzo is frustrated that he can't get on site and start building. And as an authority, we obviously want to encourage development to progress, but we've also made it clear that it should only progress on site once we're satisfied that all the matters have been addressed. So what Geraint John and his team were trying to do was to remove as much burden as possible in terms of the need for further submissions to be made. And one of those is the landscaping scheme, which came in and has demonstrated additional planting, which was over and above the original scheme that I saw, which I wasn't happy with. So we have, on balance, said that we were happy and proposed to amend the condition to just say do it in accordance with the landscaping scheme. But retaining condition 30 just kind of goes back a notch to where I was before. And if members said, well, where we agree with where you were a week ago, Steve, we're almost there, but actually we'd like a bit more assessment in that northern corner in particular about what can and can't be retained. All that they would need to do is put a discharge of condition application in with a landscaping scheme, which may or may not show 1 or 2 extra trees being retained. And it's a relatively easy process. It's just it's a application fee and a bit of due process involved. But I have no problem at all. I see Councillor Hunt has said that he would be willing to move an amendment effectively, as in not taking account of the new condition 30 and the condition 2, the new plan. And if that's what you want to put forward, I have no problem with that.
Councillor Vice Chair, you want to come back?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Steve. And perhaps Councillor Hunt has jumped in ahead of me, because I'm quite happy to support the local members, just to have a little bit of extra consultation with the developer over the trees. If the plan's already been established, it's already drawn up. If it just requires perhaps a second look and then a resubmission, and that's not going to take up too much or be too burdensome on the developer, then that sounds a way of formalising perhaps that those discussions that perhaps Mr. Ball recommended the local members have. So I'm quite happy with that.
All right, Councillor Hunt, are you ready to make a move a motion then?
Yes,
or an amendment.
Yes, the amendment as outlined by Mr. Ball, and I mean I'm happy for Councillor Percy to make the proposal, and I'll second it. I'm not concerned, but I think it's for this committee, it's the right thing to do at this moment in time. Okay. So I'm happy to make the proposal, and
right.
Sean, I don't really care, Chair, which way, but yeah.
Just want to get it done. Okay.
Get it done, yeah.
Steve Ball, then, would you have a form of words that either Councillor Hunt or Councillor Percy could actually move that amendment?
Yes, Chair. I will write something in the chat that just very shortly, which will say exactly what I'm just about to say.
No problem. I think we've been at this for so long now. that to fail at the last hurdle would be a crime. So we'll give you a few minutes just to type it.
It's fine. I will say it and I will type it thereafter so
Lovely.
that the members know.
Yeah.
I think Rebecca McGregor and Mike will say that members need to vote first on an amended resolution, which would in fact no, it wouldn't be to amend a resolution. It would effectively just be to ignore the amendments to the conditions. So you'd be voting to approve it with the original conditions 2 and 30. And let me just check the amendment sheet, sorry.
Mike Shaw then. Mike?
Yes, madam. Yes, that sounds fine.
That sounds fine. Okay, that's great then. Steve.
Sorry, Chair. I was just looking at the amendment sheet because there were three conditions proposed to be amended. There was condition 1 that had an additional wording about the phasing of the landscaping, which we would like still to be included because that's appropriate. But the condition 2 and 30 should be retained as originally drafted within the original report.
Right. So condition 2 would be 2 and 30. Yeah. Retained.
Oop.
And that condition 1 would be changed, yeah?
Yes, so condition 1 would be changed and condition 2 and 30 would stay the same.
Retain 2 and 3 and 30. That's fine. Okay, so when we come to the recommendations, that will be added in. So is there any need for the for a formal move of amendment then, Mike?
No, I think
I would say not. I'm just going to track something down for you, everyone, and if you give me 90 seconds.
Certainly, Mike.
Yes.
Are you recommending that we don't actually need a formal?
No, I don't think so. I think what
Lovely.
Steve is proposing does make sense.
And then we'll all have a vote on it anyway. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I was just wondering, would you mind perhaps to have a recess of a couple of moments to let Steve do that?
How long do you need, Steve?
Oh, it's almost done. So if you just sing a song or something.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll bear with you. It's been a long morning, afternoon type thing. I think all members would like to dovetail this, get it sorted. Then the local members can be sure that the trees will be removed as few as possible and that all the other conditions will be safe.
There we are. Thank you, madam.
By him, Lord Van.
We're not quite finished yet, Steve. We can have that at the end.
Mr. Ball said
well,
to sing.
well, luckily I've managed to send something quickly to stop any more singing, Councillor Hunt. So I've just sent the wording which I think is the most appropriate wording, that permission is granted subject to the amendment to condition 1 on the amendment sheet, but that conditions 2 and 30 are retained in accordance with the wording on the original report, brackets, to ensure that further consideration is given to the retention of trees on the site boundaries. Is that...
Well, that's...
Are you happy with that, to recommend that, Councillor Hunt?
With that,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw? Yeah.
And Councillor Doyle?
Yeah, happy.
Okay.
I'm happy with that.
Yes, thanks, Steve.
Lovely. Okay, then. On that being said, I'm grateful to local members and the Vice Chair and Steve to sort of dovetail this and make sure we're looking after the residents there and the trees. So then, therefore, the recommendation stands as at page 39 on the amendment sheet, and that it is that permission is granted subject to the amendment to condition 1 on the amendment sheet, but that condition 2 and 30 are retained in accordance with the wording on the original report to ensure that further consideration is given to the retention of trees on the site boundaries. All other conditions are as stated in the report. So do I have somebody to move that?
I will move that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Second?
I'll second the chair.
Who was that? Sorry.
Dennis Keogh.
Dennis Keogh. Thank you, Councillor Keogh. I will now call on Tammy Davis, the Democratic Services Officer, to work through the members of the committee, ask them to A, state that they've been present for the whole event, which was lengthy, and also which way they intend to vote. Tammy?
Certainly, thanks, Chair. Start with yourself, please.
Yes, Tammy, I have been here for the whole of the debate and I would go with the amendment.
Thank you, Chair. Same questions to Councillor Percy, please.
Yeah, I've been present for the whole debate. Just for clarity, are we saying whether we're voting for the recommendation at this stage?
We're voting for the recommendation. It was a slip of the tongue because
no,
Mr. Shaw has assured me that we don't need an actual amendment.
There we go.
So yeah, that's fine.
I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Dennis Keogh, please. Have you been present for the whole of the item, and how do you vote on the recommendation?
Yes, I've been here for the entire debate and I will be going for the amendment.
The recommendation,
Councillor. Yes, the recommendation.
Yeah, I do apologise. That's probably my fault because I said it first.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Mason, please.
Yes, I can confirm I've been here for the whole meeting and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Ros Davis, please.
No, there we are. Yes, I've been present for the whole meeting and I agree with the recommendation for approval.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Steve Hunt, please.
I have been here for the entire meeting and I support the recommendation.
That's great, thank you. Councillor Aaron Woolcock, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I confirm that I've been present for the entire agenda item and I'll be voting to support the recommendation.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Chris Williams, please.
I have been present for the whole meeting and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Suzanne Renkers, please.
I've been present for the whole item and I support the recommendation.
Thank you, councillor. Same to Councillor Mark Prothero, please.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, I can confirm I've been present for the whole meeting and I will be supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Scott Bamsey, please.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, I've been here for the whole meeting and support the recommendation.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Chris Jones, please.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, I've been present for the whole item and I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you, councillor. Chair, there we are. The recommendation has been approved.
Thank you very much, Tammy, and thank you, members of the committee, visitors. It's been a long morning. I would like to specially note Nicola Lake's contribution to the reports because the individuality of what was put in there was an awful lot of work. So I would just like to say thank you, Nicola Lake, for that. It does help the committee to make decisions when we have such a comprehensive report. Thank you to the speakers who came to give their opinions. And it's been a long morning, so I close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Madam.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.